Every single day, you're doing things that quietly chip away at your intelligence. Not dramatic, not obvious, subtle, silent habits that make you slower, more distracted, and less capable than you should be. And the worst part, you don't even notice it happening until you wake up one day and feel less sharp, less focused, less confident in your own mind. Today, I'm breaking down the everyday behaviors that slowly lower your intelligence so you can stop them before they cost you your potential. Number one, chronic digital overload. Chronic digital overload is one of the most underestimated forms of cognitive decline today, and it's happening to almost everyone without them realizing it. Your brain wasn't designed to shift between 10 apps, 30 notifications, and endless microstimuli every hour. Yet that's exactly what modern life demands. Every time you reach for your phone out of boredom, habit, or impulse, you interrupt your brain's natural rhythm. The constant switching teaches your mind that it never has to stay with one thought long enough to build depth, clarity, or understanding. Instead of developing strong cognitive endurance, you develop mental fragmentation, the inability to sustain attention in a world built to steal it from you. The more your brain lives in this scattered digital environment, the more it rewires itself for short-term engagement. Platforms thrive on speed, novelty, and instant gratification. Your brain begins to mirror that structure. You become addicted to quick hits of stimulation, constantly searching for something new, something faster, something easier. This leaves no room for deep work, real focus, or meaningful thinking. The tragedy is that this happens slowly, subtly, and silently. You don't wake up one day suddenly unable to concentrate. Instead, you lose your ability to focus in small, nearly invisible pieces, one notification at a time. You lose your mental stamina without ever noticing the decline until you struggle to finish tasks that once felt simple. Digital overload also destroys your brain's ability to rest. Even when you're not using your phone, your brain remains on standby for the next vibration, the next message, the next update. You may not consciously think about it, but your nervous system is constantly preparing for interruption. This creates a state of low-level mental tension, not enough to feel dramatic, but enough to keep your brain from truly relaxing or recovering. Your mind stays in a fragmented loop, replaying partial thoughts, unfinished tasks, and incomplete attention cycles. Over time, this leaves you feeling mentally tired even when you haven't done anything mentally challenging. You start confusing exhaustion with laziness and distraction with personality. The worst part is how digital overload blocks original thinking. When you consume more than you process and react more than you reflect, your mind loses the ability to generate its own ideas. Constant exposure to other people's opinions, content, and information leaves no empty space in your brain for creativity, problem solving, or introspection. The mind becomes cluttered, overstimulated, and overstretched, operating in survival mode instead of growth mode. Number two, lack of deep sleep. Lack of deep sleep is one of the most silent and misunderstood destroyers of intelligence in the modern world. Most people think missing a few hours of sleep is harmless, something they can catch up on later, but the brain doesn't work that way. Deep sleep is when your mind performs its most important maintenance, organizing memories, repairing neural pathways, flushing out toxins, and restoring emotional balance. When you cut your sleep short, even by an hour or two, you interrupt these essential processes. You may convince yourself that you're functioning fine, but internally, your brain is losing clarity, slowing down, and struggling to operate at full capacity. Sleep isn't just rest, it's neurological survival, and the damage from skipping it accumulates quietly over time. In a sleep-deprived state, your brain becomes dramatically less efficient. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for decision-making, focus, impulse control, and reasoning, becomes impaired, almost as if it's shutting down to conserve energy. This makes it harder to think clearly, remember details, or stay organized. You find yourself rereading the same sentence, forgetting where you place things, losing your train of thought mid-conversation, or reacting emotionally to things that wouldn't normally bother you. These aren't personality flaws. They are symptoms of cognitive depletion caused by insufficient deep sleep. When your brain is tired, it begins operating in survival mode rather than growth mode, sacrificing intelligence for basic functioning. Another consequence of inadequate deep sleep is the way it disrupts your emotional and psychological stability. Without enough restorative sleep, your brain becomes more sensitive to stress, more reactive to negativity, and less capable of logical evaluation. You become quicker to anger, slower to respond rationally, and more easily overwhelmed by everyday pressures. This drains your mental energy throughout the day, leaving even less cognitive capacity for creativity, problem solving, or learning. Your brain ends up working twice as hard for half the results, creating a constant sense of internal heaviness that you can't quite explain. You start blaming yourself for being unmotivated when in reality, your brain is simply exhausted. Lack of deep sleep also affects your ability to form and retain memories. During deep sleep, the brain takes the information you learned throughout the day and transfers it into long-term storage. When you don't reach that deep cycle, those memories remain scattered and fragile, making them easier to forget or harder to recall when you need them. This subtle erosion of memory contributes to a gradual decline in confidence and competence, making even simple tasks feel more mentally draining than they should be. Number 3, avoiding hard tasks. Avoiding hard tasks is one of the quietest ways people lower their intelligence without ever realizing it. The human brain grows through challenge, resistance, and effort. It becomes sharper when it is forced to stretch, adapt, and solve complex problems. But when you repeatedly choose comfort over difficulty, your brain stops building the neural pathways that strengthen focus, discipline, and analytical thinking. Every time you procrastinate, every time you choose something easy instead of something demanding, every time you avoid discomfort, you're telling your brain it doesn't need to work as hard. Slowly, you lose the mental stamina required for deep thinking, and your mind becomes conditioned to seek the path of least resistance. What feels like temporary avoidance eventually becomes a long-term habit of cognitive decline. The problem with avoiding difficult tasks is that it reinforces a mindset where challenge equals danger instead of growth. When you consistently choose comfort, your brain becomes more sensitive to stress and more resistant to effort. Tasks that once seemed manageable begin to feel overwhelming because your mental muscles aren't being used enough to stay strong. You stop trusting yourself to handle things, not because you're incapable, but because you haven't practiced pushing through resistance. Over time, this chips away at your confidence and reduces your willingness to engage with anything that requires real mental effort. The brain is always learning, and when you avoid hard things, it learns to fear them. Avoidance also weakens your cognitive endurance, the ability to stay focused on a single task for an extended period. Hard tasks require patience, concentration, and delayed gratification, all of which sharpen your intelligence. But when your default reaction is to avoid anything demanding, your ability to sustain focus diminishes. You become easily distracted, mentally restless, and unable to stay present with one thought long enough to reach clarity. Instead of training your brain to push through cognitive discomfort, you train it to quit the moment things get difficult, which leads to short attention spans and a constant craving for easy stimulation. The consequences extend beyond intelligence. Avoiding hard tasks affects creativity, problem solving, and emotional resilience. When you never give yourself the chance to struggle, you never experience the breakthroughs that come from working through complexity. You stop learning how to adapt when things go wrong, how to think your way through obstacles, or how to stay grounded under pressure. Hard tasks teach your brain how to grow, and when you avoid them, you deny yourself the very experiences that build mental strength and long-term cognitive health. Number 4, toxic people and environments. Toxic people and environments affect your intelligence in ways you almost never notice at first. Their influence is subtle, emotional, psychological, and cumulative. When you spend time around people who constantly criticize, belittle, manipulate, or drain you, your brain is forced into a defensive state. Instead of expanding, thinking clearly, or exploring possibilities, your mind becomes preoccupied with monitoring threats, anticipating reactions, and protecting yourself from emotional harm. This constant state of alertness consumes enormous cognitive energy, leaving less room for creativity, learning, or rational decision-making. The brain cannot operate at its best when it's busy managing stress responses created by the people around you. Being in a toxic environment also reshapes how you think about yourself. When you're surrounded by negativity long enough, your brain begins to internalize the messages you hear. Doubt grows louder, confidence shrinks. Your ability to trust your own thoughts becomes weaker. This psychological erosion doesn't just harm your emotions, it directly lowers your cognitive performance. When you don't feel safe, supported, or mentally respected, your brain becomes less willing to take risks, solve problems, or think deeply. Instead of exploring ideas, you second guess them. Instead of focusing, you ruminate. Instead of growing, you stagnate. Toxicity doesn't just make you unhappy, it makes you intellectually smaller. Another way toxic people lower your intelligence is by disrupting your focus. They thrive on drama, chaos, instability, and emotional volatility. Every argument, guilt trip, passive aggressive comment, or unpredictable reaction forces your brain to shift attention away from your goals and toward managing someone else's emotional climate. Even when they're not physically present, their influence lingers in your mind. You replay conversations, imagine confrontations, and anticipate problems that haven't happened yet. This consumes mental bandwidth you could use for clarity, learning, or productivity. When your mind is occupied with emotional cleanup, it has no space left for deep thinking. Toxic environments also discourage ambition and suppress potential. People who feel threatened by your growth will subtly undermine your effort, ridicule your goals, or make you feel guilty for wanting more. Over time, this conditions you to shrink yourself, lower your expectations, and avoid opportunities that could elevate your intelligence or your life. Your brain adapts to the environment it lives in, and if that environment is filled with negativity, hostility, or limitation, your mind eventually mirrors it. You stop expanding because the environment punishes expansion instead of encouraging it. Number 5. Poor nutrition and dehydration. Poor nutrition and dehydration slowly erode your intelligence in ways most people overlook because the symptoms appear subtle at first. A little mental fog, a slight dip in focus, occasional forgetfulness. But these small effects compound into long-term cognitive decline. The brain is an energy-intensive organ, using roughly 20% of the body's total energy, and it depends on consistent, high-quality fuel to function properly. When you feed your body processed foods, excessive sugar, low-quality fats, or meals lacking nutrients, you're starving your brain of what it needs to maintain clarity, memory, and mental endurance. Over time, the cumulative impact of poor nutrition begins to dull your cognitive responses, making it harder to learn, harder to think critically, and harder to stay mentally sharp. Dehydration amplifies this decline in an even more immediate way. Even slight dehydration, as little as 1 to 2% fluid loss, can reduce cognitive performance, slow reaction time, and impact decision making. The brain is composed of nearly 75% water, and when it doesn't get enough, it literally begins to shrink and work less efficiently. Electrical signals slow down, synapses fire more weakly, and your ability to retain or recall information weakens. You feel tired, irritable, unfocused, and sluggish, often assuming you're stressed or unmotivated when in reality your brain is simply dehydrated. People underestimate how deeply hydration influences intelligence because it's not dramatic, but the effect is constant and powerful. Poor nutrition also disrupts the brain's chemical balance. Diets high in sugar and processed foods lead to spikes and crashes in blood glucose, which directly affect mood, concentration, and mental stability. These fluctuations make it difficult for the brain to maintain steady focus, causing feelings of jitteriness followed by crashes of exhaustion. This roller coaster pattern conditions the brain to rely on quick bursts of unhealthy energy instead of stable, sustained mental strength. Over time, this weakens cognitive resilience and makes it harder to stay disciplined or think deeply without becoming mentally fatigued. You start experiencing brain fog not because you're incapable of clarity, but because your brain is constantly fighting against the chemical chaos created by poor dietary habits. On top of this, chronic nutrient deficiencies, such as low levels of omega-3 fatty acids, vitamins B6 and B12, magnesium, or essential minerals, hinder neurotransmitter production. These chemicals are responsible for mood, motivation, and cognitive function. Without them, your brain struggles to process information efficiently, leading to forgetfulness, slower thinking, and reduced problem-solving ability. Poor nutrition and dehydration don't just make you physically weaker, they undermine the very structure and performance of your brain, gradually lowering your intelligence through everyday habits that often go unnoticed. Number 6. Information without application. Information without application is one of the most deceptive forms of intellectual decline because it convinces you that you're becoming smarter while quietly weakening your cognitive abilities. We live in an era where knowledge is abundant and easily accessible, and people consume content endlessly. motivational videos, educational posts, self help books, productivity tips, yet very few actually implement what they learn. This creates a mental illusion, the feeling of progress without the reality of progress. Your brain begins to associate learning with accomplishment, even though nothing in your life or behavior changes. Over time, this conditions your mind to value passive consumption over active engagement, which dulls your ability to think critically, solve problems, or create something original. When you consume more than you apply, your brain becomes crowded with unprocessed information. Ideas pile up, unorganized and unused, creating mental clutter that reduces clarity. The brain thrives on structure, and when it receives too much input without action, it becomes overstimulated and underdeveloped at the same time. You may feel inspired for a moment, but that feeling fades quickly because there is no physical or behavioral reinforcement to solidify the knowledge. Without taking action, the information remains superficial, never reaching the deeper layers of memory and understanding where true intelligence is formed. You end up forgetting most of what you learned because you never gave your brain a reason to store it. This habit also weakens your ability to make decisions. When you constantly consume information from different sources, you absorb conflicting opinions, strategies, and philosophies. Instead of gaining clarity, you become mentally overloaded, unsure which direction to take or which method to follow. This leads to analysis paralysis, the state where you have so much information that you can't choose a path forward. The brain becomes hesitant, cautious, and overly dependent on external guidance, losing its ability to generate conclusions, trust itself, or take confident action. The more you consume without applying, the more you reinforce the belief that you need more information before you can begin, trapping yourself in a cycle of endless learning with no execution. Information without application also diminishes creativity. When your mind is filled with other people's ideas, but you never translate them into your own work, your ability to think independently declines. Creativity requires space, mental space, emotional space, and cognitive freedom. But constant input crowds the mind and leaves no room for imagination or innovation. Instead of creating, you compare. Instead of acting, you hesitate. Instead of experimenting, you observe passively. Over time, this passive intake makes your intelligence shallow, unfocused, and dependent on external stimulation rather than internal development. Your intelligence is not fixed, and it's not something that disappears overnight. It fades in small, almost invisible ways through the habits you ignore, the environments you tolerate, and the choices you make every single day. But the moment you become aware of these patterns, you regain control. You can rebuild your focus, sharpen your thinking, protect your mind, and start living with intention again. Your brain is your greatest asset, and when you begin treating it like something worth protecting, everything in your life begins to rise with it.